Good morning. This is Father Stephen Kelly from St. John's Church in Detroit, and we are continuing our series of daily morning meditations, looking at one or another of the readings that are assigned for either morning or evening prayer, what is known as the daily office lectionary. Now, for the last couple of days, we have been doing primarily the lessons from St. Luke's Gospel, and boy, it's always great to read the Gospels and to kind of pick little pieces of it and chew upon it and meditate upon it and allow it to soak in. And we've been doing that mostly for these meditations. And in fact, today's lesson from Luke, I certainly commend you to it because it has that wonderful reading where it talks about who by being anxious can add one span or cubit to our lives. But actually, what I want to talk about today is the lesson from the book of Samuel, which we're also reading for morning prayer. And by the way, over my shoulder here is the founder of St. John's. That's Henry Porter Baldwin, and his first wife, Harriet. She died just a few years after the parish was founded. She died in 1863. We were founded in 1858. Henry Porter Baldwin lived until 1892. He died on December 31st, 1892. So I thought it'd be nice to have this meditation in between the two of our founders of this parish. But I want to look at the reading from the Old Testament lesson for today, and that is from the book of Samuel. Now, remember the story of Samuel, that Hannah, his mother, went into the temple to pray. She had been unable to have children, and her husband Elkanah, who was a wonderful man and a holy man, was also interceding for his wife, but that Hannah had an interaction with Eli, the priest, who was in charge of the temple. And in fact, she was praying and moving her lips. He thought maybe she was drunk. And in fact, when she poured out her heart to the priest, the high priest, he explained to her that in fact God would hear her prayer. He was being prophetic. And because God was merciful to her and gave her the child that she asked for in the temple, she dedicated him to the service of the Lord. And in fact, it says as soon as he was weaned, she offered him for service to Eli in the temple. So most likely children at that time period probably nursed until they were 3 or 4, maybe as old as 5. And then she gave him over to work in the temple to help the priests in order to glorify God. And interestingly, Eli had 2 sons who were awful and in fact would be the downfall of Eli and his clan working in the temple itself. And you can read about that in the 1st and 2nd chapters of the book. But we have the 3rd chapter assigned for today's lesson, and it's a wonderful one because it says that there was really no open vision or prophecy that was happening at this time, probably because of the wickedness that was happening at that period. But what we hear happening is that suddenly Eli, as he was in the temple in the Holy of Holies keeping watch, as he starts to fall asleep, he hears somebody calling his name, Samuel, Samuel. So he assumes it's Eli, so he ggets up and he goes to the priest and he says, okay, what do you need? And he said, I didn't call you, go back to sleep. And then it happens the 2nd time. Finally, on the 3rd time it happens, Eli realizes that Samuel must be hearing from the Lord and that God is trying to speak to him. So Eli gives him the greatest advice that a priest can give to anybody, and that is, next time you hear somebody calling you, say, "Speak, Lord, for I'm listening." And that is such fabulous advice. Now, I have to tell you a story. When I was the priest at St. Mary's Church in Charleroi, Pennsylvania, 20 years ago, in my life of prayer, I started to have a sense that the words, "You're finished," kept coming to my mind. Now, I wasn't sure if this meant that God was about to call me home and I should get my will ready, make sure my life insurance is paid up, or what. So I went to speak to my bishop at the time. Bishop Robert Duncan was the bishop of the Diocese of Pittsburgh, and I said to him what was going on in my prayer life, and he said, okay, look, I'll be Eli and you be Samuel. Next time you're praying like that and you sense that that is what God is saying to you, you have to say, "Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening." And so in the story of Samuel, of course, God gives Samuel a prophecy, and that is, of course, that his leadership would fall because of the 2 sons, and he's doing a new thing in Israel. And of course, Samuel will be the great prophet that will help to reveal that new thing that he is doing. In the case of my visit with Bishop Duncan and the sense that I had of I'm finished, apparently what God meant was I was finished at St. Mary's Church in Charleroi, because as I was praying about it that particular night before I went to bed, it was very much on my heart and on my mind, and I said, okay, Lord, I'm trying to listen. I'm listening now. Please, I'm not as smart as you apparently think I am. You need to speak clearly. And the next morning, I got up and I came downstairs and I turned on the computer. Remember the old days with dial-up? And the first 3 emails to come in were from the search committee head, Ralph Burton from St. John's, saying, I got your name from a parishioner. Would you consider applying to St. John's? The second one came from a friend of our families, who were a longtime friend of our families, of somebody who worked with my dad, who happened to be the treasurer of the parish, former senior warden, our parishioner Dave Schaefer, who wrote to me and said, I gave your name to the head of the search committee, and you should consider now applying to be rector of St. John's. And the third email came from a priest friend of mine working here in Detroit, Father Robert Kerr, who I'd spent with maybe 6 weeks previous to this, or maybe a month previous, with him on retreat with the Third Order Franciscans. Well, out of the blue, he emailed me to say, I was praying for you, and St. John's Church in Detroit came to my mind and my heart. Does that mean anything to you? You ought to consider looking into it. So God was very wonderful in speaking very plainly to me. And so my advice is, where might God be trying to speak to us where we just don't get the message? Sometimes he's quiet. Sometimes we just don't hear the answer clearly. And at other times, it's really as simple as saying, speak, Lord, for your servant is listening. So that's our important takeaway. On this Thursday morning, let's make sure we ask God to speak to us. And then let's make sure that we are listening. Have a blessed day.